In this lecture, I want to examine the impact of the Land League on one particular part of Offaly, and to highlight the story of one individual family who were impacted by this period in Irish history. In terms of the historiography of County Offaly, the village of Rhode is not well represented, although this lecture series has highlighted aspects of the history of Rhode in terms of the 1798 rebellion and the burning of country houses in the early 1920s. It is difficult to try and cover the impact of the land war on the county as a whole, so for that reason I want to provide a micro-study of the Rhode area as a means of trying to understand just what was happening across the county, and indeed the country, during the early 1880s, a period which would become known as the Land War. The Land League was the popular name of the Irish National Land League, founded on the 21st of October 1879 at a meeting in the Imperial Hotel, Dublin. This group was modelled on the Land League of Mayo, which had been founded earlier that year on the 16th of August. The Land League was a reaction to the worsening conditions experienced by tenant farmers during the agricultural depression of the late 1870s, and was a significant development in what would become known as the Land War. The radical nature of the Land League was demonstrated in its constitution. The land of Ireland belongs to the people of Ireland, to be held and cultivated for the sustenance of those whom God decreed to be the inhabitants thereof. Those who cultivate have a higher claim to its absolute possession than those who make it an article of barter to be used to dispose of for purposes of profit or pleasure. The League, supported by members of the IRB, the Irish Party and the American Fenians, gathered pace quickly. The coming together of these three groups would be known as the New Departure. The primary aim of the small tenant farmer was the procurement of tenant right, or the Ulster custom, or as it became known, the three Fs: fair rent, free sale, and fixity of tenure. Others in the Land League sought to destroy landlordism completely and to abolish peasant proprietorship. The Land League managed to unite the country for the most part, except that is, the northeast portion of Ulster, and was the first truly democratic organisation in modern Irish history. The League was supported by the Catholic clergy, many of whom themselves were from the tenant farmer class, and who proved to be ceaseless organisers at a local level. The slogans of the Land League became the catch cry of the people: down with landlordism, the land for the people, keep a firm grip on your lands, and pay no rent. Across the country, the Land League developed a tactic which would be used with great effect, and indeed the very word boycott would soon enter the English language as a result. Speaking at Ennis, County Clare, Charles Stewart Parnell called for the people to shun anyone involved in any way with land or property of an evicted tenant. He said, "You must show him on the roadside when you meet him. You must show him in the streets of the town. You must show him at the shop counter, and even in the house of worship, by leaving him alone, severely alone, by putting him into a moral Coventry." Although the Bessborough Commission recommended the reform of land law in Ireland and the implementation of the long sought-after 3Fs, by the spring of 1881, conditions in Ireland had spiralled out of control, and agitation spread as the no-rent campaign gathered pace. Landlords in turn would respond by evicting tenants, and so the war began. Between the summer of 1881 and the summer of 1882, hostility between landlords and tenants in the Rhode area intensified, culminating in the deaths of the Kavanagh children in the summer of 1882. Firstly, let us examine how events unfolded. In 1881, several Land League members in Kings County were arrested and imprisoned as a campaign of withholding rents got underway in the county. The no-rent campaign also resulted in a number of evictions taking place, including at Clara, where the Kelly family were evicted at Kilmucklin in May. At Clahan, several thousand attended a Land League meeting, where the Reverend Ryan stated that if people had guns, they would level them at their enemies, the landlords. Lawrence Slevin, a shoemaker and member of the Land League, was arrested and imprisoned following this meeting. The proposed Land Act, which promised reform for tenants, was widely rejected across the country, none more so than at Rhode, where a meeting of the Land League was convened in mid-April 1881 to debate its contents. Chaired by Reverend Arthur Hume, a prominent supporter of the Land League in the area, there was considerable anger that a government note-taker was present, but this did not prevent the tone or content of the meeting. The meeting was also notable for the presence of the former suspect, Bernard Ennis, who had been released from prison some months previously. Indeed, the success of the National Land League was that it brought to prominence local leaders such as Ennis, who carried the torch locally for Parnell and Davitt. Ennis on this occasion stated that he did not think much of the proposed Land Act and hoped that it would be remedied, but reminded people that they should not forsake the Land League until it was. Somewhat more vocal on this occasion was the Reverend Parkinson of Rhode, who told the crowd, "Away with landlordism altogether. Look at Rhode Bridge. See the houses there. Are they fit for habitation? No. Would the landlords make a kennel of them? No. Would they put their hunters in them? No. They are not fit for their hunters and dogs, but they are too good for the poor tenants who inhabit them." In August 1881, a huge demonstration was held in Edenderry in support of the imprisoned Land League official George Patterson, a publican in the town. Here again, the Rhode and Croghan Land League played an important role and were well represented among the 3,000-strong crowd who turned up to bring Patterson's turf home as an act of defiance and to show their solidarity with their imprisoned colleague. Among the Rhode contingent present were Richard Hughes, Bernard Ennis and John Wheelahan, who carried banners with the inscription Irish National Land League, Rhode and Croghan. Workers on the Nesbitt estate at Tubberdaley near Rhode were forbidden to take part in the demonstration by their employer, but most left their work and made their way to Edenderry to take part. Praise was heaped on Bernard Ennis for his organisation of the event, but he too would soon fall foul of the authorities and was imprisoned for his Land League activities. The presence of the Rhode men in helping draw Patterson's turf at Edenderry had irked the landlords of the Rhode area. The leading figure of the Rhode and Croghan Land League branch, Bernard Ennis, was duly summoned before the petty sessions. In what was termed the Queen versus Ennis, a huge crowd gathered at Fahy Courthouse in August, when Ennis was charged that on the 2nd of August 1881 in Fahy, Kings County, for the purpose and with view of compelling one Thomas Murphy and one Michael Graham to an act which they had a legal right to abstain from doing, namely, to join a procession for the purpose of drawing home the turf for one George Patterson, wrongfully and without legal authority did intimidate the said Thomas Murphy and Michael Graham by threatening to boycott them. With agitating mounting outside the building and in the area in general, the case against Ennis was dismissed and he was duly freed. Tension in the Rhode area was growing, and there were a number of incidents which suggested that a major clash between landlord and tenant was coming. 2 days before Ennis's trial at Fahy, on the 13th of August 1881, a demonstration took place on Leitrim Hill between Edenderry and Rhode, indicating a more menacing spirit amongst those involved in the local Land League. There, a bonfire was lit to celebrate the release of John Dillon, MP, from prison, and the procession to the field was headed by Davy Woods, the Land League piper. During the course of the proceedings, an effigy of Norris Goddard was burned, in the presence of 2 policemen who were discovered watching the proceedings. Goddard had been responsible for buying up land in Croghan from an evicted tenant and was thus deemed to have broken the rules of the Land League. It was claimed that the accused, Norris Goddard, having been found guilty by the gentlemen of the jury, should be hung by the neck until he is dead. Of course, this was just an effigy or likeness of Goddard, but it did underline the seriousness of those gathered there on that occasion, and that the land war was well underway in Kings County. In September, the Rhode and Croghan branch met in Rhode, where Bernard Ennis was selected to represent the group at a national convention in Dublin. But there was a further escalation in the tension in the Rhode area between the police and the Land League. following a decision of the Rhode publicans not to serve the police after an eviction at Carrick near Edenderry. The police responded by threatening to prevent the issuing of licences for the pubs. A clash was now imminent, and the Ennis brothers would soon be rounded up and imprisoned. On the 2nd of November 1881, at 3 a.m. in the morning, the police arrested Bernard Ennis and James Ennis on the charge of inciting the public not to pay rent. Responding to the imprisonment of the Ennises, over 1,000 people gathered at Rhode in the coming days, where under the direction of the Rhode and Croghan Land League, the crops of the imprisoned men were saved on 6 different farms, some 4 to 5 miles in distance from each other. Assembling in the village of Rhode, the group, numbering close to 1,000 people, were headed by Davy Woods, the Land League piper. About the scene, the Leinster leader reported, "The home contingent took their place, headed by Davy Woods, the original Land League piper. His green tunic, white breeches, top boots, and large soft white hat, surmounted with a long feather, reminded one of the days of old, and we doubt if in days of old the Irish bagpipes ever yielded more sweet music than it did beneath the sensitive touch and musical ability of Mr. Woods. He was seated in a donkey's phaeton, gorgeously decorated, and surmounted with imitation spears, having orange and green pennons on the pike ends. After the piper, about 2,000 diggers marched to this martial strain, bearing their grapes in rifle fashion. 400 pickers came next, each 2 bearing a basket between them. The Edenderry, Phillipstown, and Castlejordan Land League branches were also represented. The other central figure in the Rhode and Croghan Land League was Reverend Arthur Hume. Throughout the 1880s, Hume defended his parishioners at every opportunity, and in 1886 represented them in Dublin at meetings with the landlords and their agent, a man named Verschoyle, who was in charge of at least 2 large estates at Rhode. Hume specifically looked for the removal of emergency men from the Rhode area, those who had come to take up farms of evicted tenants, or to help in the saving of crops at harvest time. In January 1887, the Rhode and Croghan Land League came together to show their support for Hume, who it was said had been insulted by Verschoyle at these meetings. Taking the chair on this occasion, Bernard Ennis claimed that it was the greatest honour for a Catholic to defend a priest, and that Hume had faced down the clique of Scotch and Cromwell's men. Unable to get the better of the Land League at Rhode, Hume was summoned before the Petty Sessions in Phillipstown a few months later, much to the chagrin of his colleagues. The charge on this occasion was that he had used offensive language towards a so-called emergency man, but thereafter Hume was celebrated in Rhode as a hero of the Land League and spoke the following month at a demonstration in Edenderry. When he died 8 months later in December 1887, his funeral was a huge display of support for the Land League in Rhode, where he had spent 14 of his 49 years in the priesthood. Overseen by Reverends Hume and Parkinson, the Leinster Leader report continued. The following bands were in attendance: the brass band of the Edenderry Home Rule Club, Ballinabrackey Fife and Drum, and the Rhode Fife and Drum Band. The greatest good humour prevailed throughout the day. The demonstration reflects infinite credit on the neighbourhood, and was in every way worthy of the suspects and of the good old cause. When the late Secretary and the late Treasurer of the Rhode and Croghan branch of the Irish National Land League hear of these events in their lonely cell, we hope they will find in their hearty sympathy and determined earnestness of the entire people of King's County and Kildare some recompense for their sufferings and some proof that they have not laboured in vain. With members of the Land League imprisoned, the women of Rhode and Croghan, as they did elsewhere, came together to form a Ladies' League. At their inaugural meeting, they thanked the tenants of the Dames estate at Rhode for their actions in defying the landlord and in supporting the ideals of the Land League. The involvement of women in the movement was central to its success and survival, particularly throughout late 1881 and 1882. Continuously harassed by members of the RIC, the Ladies' Land League defied orders to cancel their meetings and kept pressure on landlords and government. Not wanting to publicly challenge the Land League, the landlords of the Rhode area, who included the Rates, the Nesbits and the Dames, used other means to thwart the growing threat of the Land League, including at the local Board of Guardians meetings in Edenderry and through the use of the police. Indeed, there is evidence from the Petty Sessions reports that members of the Land League branches in this part of Offaly were regularly brought before the courts for misdemeanours or for what might be deemed petty incidents, including having no lights on carts, stray dogs, and animals trespassing on land or on the public road. It was their way of trying to break the Land League. The Land League responded by boycotting those who were deemed to be sympathetic to the landlords. Shops were avoided, and those who worked on landlord farms, known as emergency men, were publicly shunned and ostracised in the locality. In Rhode, Land League members refused to sit beside people in the church, leaving at least 4 pews between them, while the subscription of another person who had sided with the landlords was refused at the church door when the priest said his halfpenny wouldn't be took. And there were more malicious treatment meted out by both sides. In December 1881, for example, a malicious burning took place near Rhode, when a barn and corn store with about 3 tons of hay, 12 barrels of oats and 1 cart of straw, a threshing machine and barrows and other articles were burned belonging to Charles Meredith, who lived at Coolville. Meredith's crime, it seems, was that he had associated himself with the landlords and was unsympathetic in general to the activities of the Land League. Sometime later, he advertised the sale of his home at Rhode and removed from Kings County permanently. In April 1882, an incident occurred in Rhode which would place considerable scrutiny on both the activities of the Land League and, more importantly, the actions of the local landlords. The callous eviction of a family named Kavanagh, 11 in number, was all the more appalling as the landlord in question knew that the children were sick with measles, and over the course of the next 8 weeks, 2 of them would die from exposure to the cold as they sought refuge in a neighbour's barn. According to the Nation newspaper, the revelations made at the inquest would startle the rulers of any country and inspire them into taking instant action towards the complete reformation of the official system, but not in Ireland. The story, according to the Nation newspaper, was both lamentable and bitterly irritating. The newspaper provided a brief synopsis of what had transpired at Rhode. A labouring man named Kavanagh struck for higher wages, as he had the perfect right to do, and was in consequence evicted by his employer, who also acted within his legal right at the time of eviction. Kavanagh's children were suffering from measles, but that untoward circumstance was overlooked when he and his family were turned out. Kavanagh, with his wife and 9 sick children, took refuge in a windowless and chimneyless barn, kindly afforded them for shelter by a good woman of the neighbourhood. The place was unfit for habitation by sick children, and 2 of Kavanagh's children died in it. On the second of these, the inquest referred to was held, and the jury found that death was accelerated by exposure and cold on the night of the eviction. So far, that is the lamentable part of the story. Now for the irritating. The case of Kavanagh was brought to the notice of the Ladies' Land League in Dublin, which, being a charitable association and recognising no difference between the labourer houseless and the farmer in the same unhappy predicament, sent down to him from Dublin the materials for a wooden structure in which he and his family would live. The police, however, prevented it from being erected, and 2 of the men overseeing the work were arrested and imprisoned for 6 weeks. The eviction of the Kavanagh family in Rhode was raised in the House of Commons towards the end of April, some days after the eviction took place. In the House of Commons, Bernard Malloy, representing Kings County, asked the Chief Secretary to the Lord Lieutenant of Ireland about the issue and why the people had been prevented from erecting a hut for Kavanagh. William Forrester, known to the Land League as Buckshot Forrester, said that in March the labourers of the place in question struck for an increase of wages, and a number of Scots labourers were obtained in their place. Protection for these men had been necessary, and a military guard had been sent to Rhode. On the 25th of April, materials arrived in Rhode, and several people arrived to erect them. It was, claimed Forrester, that the huts were being erected to intimidate the newly arrived workers. When the 2 Kavanagh children died, a parliamentary inquiry was undertaken, and the results of which were delivered to government. The report found that Kavanagh had appealed to the Petty Sessions at Fahy, near Rhode, for a stay on the ejectment warrant, stating that his children were suffering from measles. The landlord in question, David Kerr of Clonnon House near Rhode, gave an undertaking that if it was certified by a medical officer that the children were sick, then the warrant would not be enforced. No certificate was produced, however, and on the 18th of April, Kavanagh and his family were evicted. It was a bitterly cold day, and the children suffering from measles had to remain on the side of the road for several hours. Their mother, Bridget Kavanagh, left the scene of the eviction, carrying one child who was too weak to walk, while the twins were carried in the cradle by two of the other children, aged 9 and 7, respectively. The two Kavanagh infants who died, one on the 29th of May and the other on the 23rd of June, were twins, aged just 12 months old, and they occupied the same cradle. The huts, known as Land League huts, were to be erected on the land belonging to Bernard Ennis, the Rhode suspect, who had been arrested the previous winter. The construction of the huts was to take place under the supervision of Thomas O'Brien of Leitrim House, but this was prevented by the police. There were claims also that the materials brought from Dublin were paraded past David Kerr's house at Clonnon in an effort to intimidate him, but this was strongly denied by the Land League. Held in the courthouse in Edenderry in July, several witnesses were called to give evidence to the government inquiry, including the landowner in question, David Kerr of Clonnon, Patrick Kavanagh and his wife Bridget, RIC officers and others who had a connection to the case. Denying that their tactics were heavy-handed, David Kerr stated that on the day of the eviction, only a special bailiff and himself and 2 or 3 of his men and some police attended the scene. Speaking at the inquiry, Bridget Kavanagh stated that the barn in which they were accommodated after the eviction had no chimney and that the family were nearly smothered with the smoke of the small fire which he used to cook food. It was obvious that these conditions added to the family's woes and the ultimate demise of her children. In the end, the report conducted by Richard Burke, a local government board inspector, concluded that there was no clear evidence to show that the children were victims of exposure subsequent to eviction and the defective accommodation afforded by the barn. Dr. Robert Saunderson of Edenderry stated that the infants were extremely delicate and badly developed, but as he was only called in 5 or 6 weeks after the eviction, he had no means of judging if they suffered by the removal. However, it was obvious from Burke's report that efforts to hold an inquest on the body of the first child were thwarted and did not occur until some time after the death, further suggesting that some wrongdoing had occurred and that a cover-up was in place. Burke's conclusion was that the facts of the case exonerated David Kerr from any undue harshness. With regard to the refusal to allow the erection of Land League huts, Burke justified it on the grounds that there was in no doubt intimidation on the part of the Land League. For Bernard Ennis and the Rhode Land League, the struggle against the landlords of the area would continue throughout the 1880s and the 1890s. In August 1886, the Rhode branch met to express sympathy with Ennis, who had recently been evicted from 2 farms in the Rhode area. Once again chaired by Reverend Hume, the meeting expressed solidarity with their long-serving president. According to Hume, it was a determined and united stand on the part of the people against the eviction crusade that was being inaugurated in the Rhode area. He would personally head a fund for the purpose of indemnifying Ennis with as substantial an amount as he could conveniently allocate, and he hoped to see a similar evidence of practical sympathy throughout the King's County and its neighbouring counties. Speaking at the same event, Father Carey of Phillipstown, or Dangan as it is known today, stated that it was their bounden duty of every sterling nationalist to rally around Mr. Ennis and to show sympathy in a practical manner. Throughout the 1880s, the Rhode branch were ready to come together at any stage to defend their members, including William Leahy, who spent over 2 years evicted from his home, Stonehouse, between Edenderry and Rhode. Once again led by Bernard Ennis, this group showed solidarity with Leahy, contributing handsomely to his testimonial. The group also came together to defend members who were targeted by outrage, including in 1883 Andrew Doolan, who had hay burned maliciously near Rhode. The group came together, showing their abhorrence for the act by sending small quantities of hay to Doolan. For Bernard Ennis, the remainder of the 1880s and the 1890s was a continuous battle with landlords, and he was twice evicted in the 1890s before being restored to his holding. The determination of Ennis was evident at the Kings County Land League Convention in 1890, when, speaking in the wake of the celebrated Clongowry evictions in County Kildare the previous year, Bernard Ennis stated that, "I am speaking for the people of Rhode, and should say that they were as determined to fight the battle out as when they commenced 5 years ago. He could assure them that they would not falter 1 inch, and they were as loyal as ever, and more so to their respected leader, Mr. Charles Parnell, and the Irish Party." For that brief moment in the summer of 1882, the village of Rhode in northeast Offaly was at the centre of a Land League storm, but the publication of the government inquiry effectively ended any controversy. While Kerr was ultimately exonerated for his actions in evicting the Kavanaghs and refusing permission for huts to be built to accommodate them, it was obvious to all concerned that the Kavanagh family, and in particular the 2 young twin boys, had become victims of the so-called land war. The initial attempts by men working on the Kerr estate to lobby for an increase in wages was seen as part of the Land League tactics, and thus the men were punished. While the agitation did not cease around Rhode and in that part of the Kings County, it did dissipate somewhat afterwards. The land issue, however, was still unresolved and would once again resurface towards the end of the 1880s in Rhode and elsewhere. Solving the Irish land question would prove to be a difficult task and linger well into the 20th century in County Offaly.